you ever seen a revenge wedding where it was just about getting back at an ex? Story 1. I once attended a wedding that was clearly about revenge. The bride, my cousin, had been dumped by her long-term boyfriend for a younger, her coworker no less. She was devastated at first, but then, almost immediately, she started dating this new guy and announced their engagement within 3 months. Everyone thought it was too soon. But the real kicker? The wedding venue was the exact same place her ex had planned to propose to. She even made sure the date was dangerously close to when he and his new fiancée were set to get married. The wedding itself was dripping with pettiness. During the speeches, she thanked her past heartbreak for showing her what real love looks like. The best part? She invited her ex's family, whom she had always been close to, and they actually came. The whole night, they kept telling the groom how lucky he was, and reminiscing about how much time they spent with my cousin and her ex. The ex's new fiancé was apparently fuming about the whole thing, and just a week later they postponed their wedding. My cousin didn't care. Mission accomplished. The marriage didn't last long, though. A year later, they divorced, and she casually mentioned on Facebook that it was the best decision of her life. Story 2. A guy I went to college with pulled the ultimate revenge wedding. His ex-fiancée had dumped him at the altar, claiming she wasn't ready and needed to focus on herself. 2 months later, she was engaged to someone else. He was devastated at first, but then he started dating a woman from work and, within a year, announced his wedding. But this wasn't just any wedding. It was an exact replica of the one his ex had planned with him. Same venue, same flowers, same everything. The kicker? He even hired the same photographer and made sure the wedding photos were posted on social media with eerily similar captions. The level of pettiness reached new heights when he invited mutual friends and asked them to do side-by-side comparisons of his wedding and his ex's on social media. The resemblance was insane. His ex? She apparently had a meltdown, commenting on posts about how disrespectful he was. His new wife? She thought the whole thing was hilarious. They were both in on the joke. And the best part? They're still happily married. Story 3. I once worked a wedding where the bride was way too focused on her ex. She had been with this guy for 7 years before he cheated on her and married the girl he cheated with. And let me tell you, her revenge was meticulous. First, she made sure her wedding was on the exact same date as her ex's anniversary. She also sent out invitations to all their mutual friends, emphasizing how she was marrying a man who actually knows how to be faithful. But the real masterpiece was her vows. She started off with, "I used to think I knew what love was, but then I realized that real love doesn't lie, doesn't cheat, and doesn't replace you like last season's handbag." The entire audience gasped. She kept going, slipping in passive-aggressive comments about honoring commitments and not looking for the next best thing. Her ex apparently heard about it through mutual friends, and his wife went on a Facebook rant about how bitter people should stay in therapy. The bride? She just posted a honeymoon picture with the caption, "Winners focus on winning." Story 4. My coworker had a revenge wedding and it was painfully obvious. Her ex had dumped her right after proposing, claiming he wasn't in love anymore. 3 months later, he was engaged to another woman. She was furious, and instead of moving on, she made sure her wedding was the ultimate clapback. She even chose a wedding dress that was eerily similar to the one her ex's fiancé had posted online months before. The pettiest moment? She arranged for a group photo where everyone at the wedding held up signs spelling out, "Everything happens for a reason." Then she made it her profile picture. Her ex's new fiancé messaged her, furious, saying she was obsessed. My coworker just replied, "If the shoe fits." The marriage didn't last, but she still says it was worth every penny. Story 5. One of the wildest weddings I ever attended was purely for revenge. The bride's ex had dumped her via text after 5 years together, only for her to find out he was engaged to someone else a month later. So what did she do? She got engaged fast and planned the most over-the-top wedding imaginable. And the centerpiece? Her guest list. She invited every single mutual friend she and her ex shared, including his boss, former teammates, and even his own mother, who still loved her. She also made sure the entire event was live-streamed and accidentally tagged him in the post. But the most savage moment? During the reception, she got on stage and toasted to the ones who got away, before adding, or in my case, the ones who ran. The crowd lost it. Her ex apparently watched the whole thing and tried calling her afterward. She never answered. Story 6. One of my friends got married purely to get back at her ex, and it was painfully obvious. She had been with this guy for almost a decade, expecting a proposal, when out of nowhere, he broke up with her. He said he wasn't ready for commitment and wanted to find himself. Less than a year later, boom, he's engaged to some girl he'd only been dating for 6 months. My friend was livid, but instead of confronting him, she decided on a different approach, a wedding of her own. She met a guy on a dating app, and within 3 months, they were engaged. Everyone thought it was way too fast, but she didn't care. She booked the same wedding venue her ex had chosen and even used the same decorator. But the pettiness peaked at the reception when she played a special slideshow of her past relationships, and just so happened to include dozens of pictures of her and her ex together. People were whispering at the tables, and her new husband looked so uncomfortable. Her ex found out about the whole thing and sent her a long message about how toxic she was. Her response? A honeymoon selfie captioned, "When you upgrade, you stop looking back." The marriage lasted about a year. Story 7. I went to a wedding that screamed revenge, but the groom was the one getting even. His ex-fiancée had cheated on him with her boss, and to make matters worse, she did it while they were planning their wedding. He found out, canceled everything, and disappeared for a while. Then, 2 years later, boom, out of nowhere, he's engaged again. And not just engaged, he planned the most extravagant wedding imaginable. The venue, the exact one he and his ex had booked. The band, the same one his ex had chosen for their canceled wedding. But the absolute best part? His vows. He stood up there, took a deep breath and said, "I once thought I knew what love was, but love doesn't betray you in a hotel room with your superior." There was a collective gasp from the guests. His bride laughed. She knew it was coming. The wedding photos? They looked eerily similar to the ones his ex had once dreamed of having. And of course, he made sure mutual friends posted them everywhere. The kicker? His ex's new husband, her boss, lost his job a month later due to some work scandal. The groom? Still happily married. Story 8. I was a bridesmaid in what I thought was going to be a beautiful love story. Turns out it was a full-scale revenge wedding. The bride, my childhood friend, had been dumped by her ex in the most brutal way. He left her at the airport right before they were supposed to go on a vacation. He texted her while she was waiting at the gate and told her he'd fallen for someone else. She was devastated. But rather than wallow, she went full petty mode. Fast forward a year, and she meets this new guy. Within months, she gets engaged and starts planning a wedding. And let me tell you, every single detail was meant to rub it in her ex's face. She got married at his dream venue, wore the designer dress he once said he'd love to see her in, and invited his sister as a guest. But the worst part? She sent a wedding invitation to his workplace. He actually showed up. He stood in the back, arms crossed, watching her walk down the aisle. And when she saw him, she smiled the biggest, most victorious smile I've ever seen. They didn't last long, though. A year later, they divorced. But she says she has no regrets. Story 9. A guy in my friend group had one of the pettiest revenge weddings I've ever seen. His ex dumped him because she wanted someone with more ambition. A few months later, she was engaged to a doctor. So what did my friend do? He found a girl, who was lovely by the way, and proposed within 6 months. But the wedding was where things got interesting. First, he made sure it happened before his ex's wedding. And then, he invited a bunch of her friends, who all came. The wedding decor? Almost identical to what his ex had posted on Pinterest. The cake? A replica of the one she'd talked about wanting. And the biggest insult? His first dance song was the one she had planned to use for her wedding. The ex ? She found out about all of this and sent him a message saying he was sad and pathetic. His response? "You should have aimed higher." He and his wife are still together. But to this day, I think that wedding was more about proving a point than love. Story 10. The most awkward wedding I ever attended was a full-on revenge mission. The bride had been engaged before, but her ex called it off after cheating on her with someone from their friend group. She was heartbroken for a while, but then she got engaged very quickly to a new guy. And the way she handled the wedding? Pure, unfiltered pettiness. First, she booked a lavish venue, way more extravagant than anything she and her ex had planned. Then, she hired his favorite band as the live entertainer. But the real showstopper? Her wedding dress. It was identical to the one her ex's new fiancé had posted as her dream dress on Instagram. And when people started to notice, she played dumb and said, "Oh wow, what a coincidence." The pièce de résistance? She hired a professional videographer to put together an emotional, cinematic wedding film, and then sent the link to her ex's entire friend group. The ex's fiancé lost it and had a full meltdown on social media about insecure women. The bride? She just liked the post and went on her honeymoon. Story 11. I once attended a wedding where the entire thing felt like a performance for the ex. The bride had been in a relationship for 7 years when her boyfriend abruptly ended things, claiming he wasn't ready for marriage. She was devastated, until she found out that just 6 months later, he was engaged to someone else. She was furious, but instead of confronting him, she channeled her rage into planning her own wedding. She met a guy, rushed into an engagement within a few months, and set a wedding date that was 2 weeks before her ex's. The location? The same venue her ex and his fiancé had booked, except she went all out. Bigger floral arrangements, a live band, a custom gown. She even hired a videographer to make sure everything was perfectly captured for social media. The pettiest part? Her vows. She went on about how she thought she knew what love was before, but real love doesn't hesitate. The entire audience knew who that was meant for. And the icing on the cake? She made sure mutual friends flooded social media with photos of the wedding, tagging locations and making it impossible for her ex's fiancé to ignore. Her marriage barely lasted a year, but the satisfaction? That lasted forever. Story 12. A guy I knew had the most brutal revenge wedding I've ever seen. His ex-fiancé had left him for his best friend, while they were actively planning their wedding. The betrayal was nuclear, and he disappeared for a while after the breakup. Then, 2 years later, he shows up on social media with an engagement announcement. But the wedding? Oh, the wedding was an absolute masterpiece of revenge. First, he chose the exact venue where he and his ex had originally planned to get married. Then, he hired the same wedding planner and even used some of the original decor that he and his ex had picked out together. But the real kicker? He invited mutual friends, including some of his ex's family members, and at the reception, during his speech, he casually dropped, "I'm so glad I waited for the right person rather than settling for a mistake." The room went silent. His ex? She saw the wedding photos all over social media and lost it. She even commented on one of them, saying, "Some people just can't let go." His response? "Some people never should have let go in the first place." They never spoke again. Story 13. I worked a wedding where the bride was more focused on her ex than her groom. She had been in a long-term relationship, expecting a proposal, when her boyfriend broke up with her saying he just wasn't ready for marriage. Less than a year later, he was engaged to her cousin. She was furious, but she decided to take the high road by getting married before them and making sure her wedding was the event of the year. She went all out, extravagant venue, a designer dress, and even a horse-drawn carriage for her entrance. But the biggest middle finger? She invited the entire family, including the ex and his fiancé. The tension was insane. And when she got up to give a speech, she casually thanked her ex for showing her exactly what she didn't want in a husband. His fiancé turned bright red. The rest of the family? Pretended not to hear. Their wedding ended up being a total flop because everyone kept comparing it to hers. She called it a win. Story 14. One of my co-workers pulled off a revenge wedding so petty that it went viral. Her ex had dumped her out of the blue, saying he didn't see a future with her. Within 3 months, he was engaged to someone else. She was devastated, but instead of moving on quietly, she did something next level. She planned her wedding, before her ex's, and made sure it was everything his fiancé wanted but couldn't afford. She got the exact dress his fiancé had posted about online. She booked the venue his fiancé had once said was her dream location. She even picked the same photographer her ex's fiancé had inquired about, meaning his wedding had to use their second choice. But the worst part? She made sure her wedding hashtag was their names combined, something his fiancé had wanted to use. So when people searched for their wedding on Instagram, hers came up instead. The ex's fiancé had a meltdown and accused her of being obsessed. My coworker just smiled and went on her honeymoon. Story 15. The most brutally calculated revenge wedding I ever saw was my cousin's. Her ex had been leading her on for years, promising marriage, only to break up with her and marry someone else within 6 months. She was heartbroken, but she was also smart. She spent a year strategically planning a wedding that would be impossible to ignore. She invited everyone from their mutual friend group, made sure her wedding date was right before her ex's, and went above and beyond to make sure it was better in every way. She had a destination wedding in Italy. She flew out guests. She had a luxury designer gown. Her ex? He had a small-town wedding, and the comparisons were brutal. Mutual friends couldn't stop talking about how different the two weddings were. But the most savage part? She sent wedding favors to some of her ex's guests, along with a note that said, "Good things take time." The ex's new wife freaked out, blocked her on everything. But my cousin just posted a honeymoon pic with the caption, "Some people settle, others upgrade." Story 16. I once attended a wedding where the bride seemed way too obsessed with her ex. At first, I thought maybe I was overanalyzing, but by the end of the night, oh, it was obvious. She had been with her ex for 5 years, and they were engaged when he broke it off, claiming he needed to focus on himself. Not even 6 months later, he was engaged to someone else. Fast forward a year, and she's getting married too. But instead of focusing on her new husband, her wedding was an absolute masterclass in pettiness. The invitations? She sent one to her ex and his fiancé. They didn't come, obviously, but she made sure everyone knew she had graciously invited them. The wedding date? Exactly 1 year to the day that he broke off their engagement. Then came her speech. She got up in front of the crowd, smiling sweetly and said, "I'm so lucky to be standing here today with a man who actually follows through on his promises." The whole room went silent before someone awkwardly started clapping. The cherry on top? Her first dance song was the same one she and her ex had picked out for their wedding. Her new husband had no idea. They were divorced within 2 years. Story 17. A guy I know threw a revenge wedding so brutal that his ex actually had to change her own wedding plans. His fiancée had dumped him for someone more stable, which apparently meant a guy who made 6 figures and drove a Tesla. Within a few months, she was engaged. Instead of moping, my friend found someone new and raced to the altar before his ex could. But the real genius move, he booked her dream venue before she could, forcing her to scramble for a second choice. Then, he hired the wedding photographer she had wanted, which meant she had to find someone else. But the biggest slap in the face? He used the same wedding hashtag his ex had talked about using years before. When people searched for her wedding, his popped up instead. His ex was furious and her new fiancé even messaged him, calling him child. His response? "That's funny coming from the guy who married my sloppy seconds." Legendary. Story 18. I was a bridesmaid in a revenge wedding so awkward, I still get secondhand embarrassment thinking about it. The bride had been in a long relationship with her ex before he cheated on her with a mutual friend. She was devastated, but instead of moving on like a normal person, she decided to weaponize her wedding. First, she booked the venue her ex had always wanted to get married at, but couldn't afford. Then, she made sure his entire friend group was invited, just so they'd compare the two relationships. But the worst part? The cake topper? It was a custom-made figurine of the bride and groom standing over a crushed figurine of a man with her ex's exact haircut. People at the reception were whispering about it the whole night. Her new husband laughed it off, but you could tell he was uncomfortable. They lasted less than a year. Story 19. One of the most petty yet hilarious revenge weddings I've ever witnessed was from my cousin. She had been engaged before, but her fiancé cheated on her with her own maid of honor. It was brutal, but instead of confronting them, she strategically plotted her revenge. A year later, she was engaged again, and the wedding planning was suspiciously familiar. She chose the same wedding colors, same flowers, and even the same reception playlist that she and her ex had planned before the breakup. But the biggest flex? Her wedding dress was identical to the one her ex's new fiancé had posted as her dream dress online. The final masterpiece? She got married 1 week before her ex, and mutual friends couldn't stop talking about how much better her wedding was. The ex's new fiancé had a meltdown on social media, accusing her of being obsessed. My cousin's response? A honeymoon selfie with the caption, "When you win, you don't have to compete." Story 20. The most brilliantly executed revenge wedding I ever saw was from a guy who had been left at the altar. His fiancée had called off the wedding the night before, saying she wasn't ready. 2 months later, she was engaged to someone new. He was devastated, but instead of falling apart, he came back swinging. A year later, he had a bigger, better wedding with a new fiancée. The venue? More expensive. The guest list? Stacked with mutual friends. The best part? His vows. Instead of just talking about love, he said, "Sometimes you think you've found your forever, but life has a way of showing you that your forever was actually someone else's placeholder." The crowd went wild. His ex, she heard about it and actually posted on Facebook about how some people never move on. His response? He liked her post and went on his honeymoon. Still, one of the best revenge weddings I've ever seen. Story 21. A friend of mine attended a wedding where the bride's main focus wasn't the groom, but her ex. She had been with her ex for years, expecting a proposal, when he suddenly broke things off, claiming he needed space to find himself. Not even 5 months later, he was engaged to a younger woman he had met while still dating my friend. Instead of sulking, she crafted the ultimate clapback wedding. First, she booked a wedding venue 1 city over from where her ex was getting married, on the exact same weekend. She made sure their mutual friends and family would have to choose which wedding to attend. And of course, her event was the more lavish one. The most savage moment? During the reception, the DJ played her ex's favorite song, the same one he and his fiancée had planned to use for their first dance. She danced to it with her new husband instead. Her ex's fiancé found out and threw a massive social media tantrum, claiming she was obsessed. The bride? She just posted a honeymoon selfie with the caption, "No time for the past when the future is this good." They lasted 2 years. The revenge? Forever. Story 22. A guy in my office pulled off one of the most devious revenge weddings I've ever heard of. He had been engaged for 3 years, patiently waiting for his fiancée to set a wedding date. Then, out of nowhere, she dumped him, claiming she wasn't sure if he was the one. Less than 6 months later, she was engaged to a guy she had been seeing behind his back. He didn't get mad. He got even. When he found a new girlfriend and got engaged, he booked the same wedding venue his ex had but couldn't afford. Not only that, but he hired the same photographer she had been obsessed with. But the final nail in the coffin? His first dance song was the one he and his ex had once chosen together. Mutual friends instantly noticed and started whispering. His ex apparently saw the wedding photos online and flipped out. She even messaged him, accusing him of copying her dream wedding. His response? I guess it was never your dream if I did it first. Brutal. Story 23. This revenge wedding was so legendary that it basically became small-town gossip. The bride had been with her ex for nearly a decade, waiting for him to propose. He always had an excuse. Not the right time. Need to save money. Let's wait another year. Then, boom, he got engaged to someone new within 8 months of dumping her. She was furious, but instead of confronting him, she pulled off the ultimate revenge. She found a great guy, got engaged quickly, and planned a wedding that was eerily similar to what she and her ex had once dreamed about. Same venue, same wedding colors, and even the same bridesmaid dresses she had originally picked for her ex's wedding plan. The pettiest part? She invited his mother, and she came. His fiancée saw the photos online and had a meltdown. She accused the bride of stealing her wedding. The bride? She just smiled and enjoyed her honeymoon. Story 24. I once went to a wedding where the groom didn't even try to hide the fact that he was using the entire event to get back at his ex. His ex had been his college sweetheart, but she left him after graduation, saying she needed to explore life before settling down. A year later, she was engaged to a wealthy guy, so the groom made sure his wedding was everything his ex could only dream of. He picked a destination wedding in Greece, something she had always wanted but could never. He had a custom designer tux, a live orchestra, and a multi-tiered cake flown in from another country. The best part? He personally sent wedding invitations to all their mutual friends, knowing word would get back to her. The ex ? She ended up canceling her own wedding 3 months later, and rumors swirled that she had tried reaching out to him afterward. Did he respond? Nope. He was too busy living his best life with his new wife. Story 25. The pettiest revenge wedding I've ever seen? Hands down this one. The bride had been dumped in the most humiliating way possible. She and her ex were high school sweethearts, engaged after college, and about to send out wedding invitations when he cheated on her with her best friend. Not only that, but he ended up marrying the friend. She was devastated, but she played the long game. A few years later, she got engaged and started planning a wedding. And the level of petty detail she put into it? Unmatched. She chose the exact same wedding date as her ex, so people had to pick sides. She hired the same caterer but upgraded the menu to make hers look way better in comparison. The most iconic moment? Her wedding invitation included the phrase, "Some mistakes last forever, but love always finds a way." Everyone knew it was about her ex's rocky marriage. Her wedding was a fairy tale. His, a disaster. They divorced 2 years later. And her, still happily married. Story 26. I attended a wedding that was so obviously revenge-driven that by the end of the night, even the groom looked uncomfortable. The bride had been engaged before, but her ex dumped her for another woman, saying he had fallen out of love. Fast forward a year, and her ex was married with a baby on the way. She, on the other hand, started plotting. She met a new guy, rushed into an engagement just to beat her ex's timeline, and planned a wedding that was eerily familiar to the one she and her ex had once dreamed of. The same color scheme, the same exact venue, and even the same menu. But the true moment of petty excellence? Her wedding vows. She started off sweet, thanking her new husband for showing her what real love is, but then she turned up the heat. Because love isn't something that disappears overnight. Love isn't a placeholder until someone better comes along. Love doesn't leave you for a woman with a cheaper dress and a borrowed personality. You could hear a pin drop. The ex's sister was at the wedding, because of course she was invited, and she recorded the whole thing. It spread like wildfire through their mutual friend group, and the ex's wife apparently had a meltdown, accusing him of still being obsessed with his ex. The couple lasted less than a year. The bride? She got her revenge and a husband. Whether she actually wanted him, though, was questionable. Story 27. This one still makes me shake my head. My buddy was engaged for 5 years to a woman he absolutely adored. He was waiting for the right moment, saving for the perfect wedding, planning their future. Then, out of nowhere, she dumped him. Her reason? I just don't think you're ambitious enough. 3 months later, She was engaged to a wealthy guy who had just inherited a family business. Rather than mope, my friend played the long game. He met someone new and got engaged within a year. But his wedding wasn't just about love. It was an absolute flex. He booked the most luxurious venue in town, flew in a celebrity chef for catering, and invited every single mutual friend he and his ex shared. His wedding band? The same one his ex had wanted for her wedding but couldn't afford. And the final, most savage move? His wedding invitation was nearly identical to the one his ex had sent out, except his tagline read, "Some things work out the way they should." His ex lost it. She showed up at his wedding, uninvited, and was caught crying in the parking lot. Her husband had to drag her away. My buddy? He toasted to dodging bullets during his reception speech. Story 28. I once worked at a wedding where the bride didn't just want to move on, she wanted to burn her ex's life to the ground. She had been in a 7-year relationship with a guy who led her on, made empty promises, and constantly told her he wasn't ready for marriage. Then boom! 2 months after their breakup, he was engaged to someone 10 years younger. She was devastated, but instead of wasting time crying, she weaponized her wedding. First, she booked the same venue her ex had proposed at. Then, she invited his entire family. They loved her and couldn't stand his new fiancé. His mom and sister actually came and gushed about how much better her wedding was compared to his. The best moment? The cake topper. It was a custom figurine of her and her new husband smiling down at a tiny crushed man in a suit, who happened to look a lot like her ex. Guests howled with laughter. Her ex's wife had a breakdown on social media, calling her obsessed and childish. The bride? She posted a honeymoon pic with the caption, "Karma tastes better than wedding cake." Story 29. One of the most brutal revenge weddings I've ever seen was a direct attack on the groom's ex. The groom had been with his ex for 8 years. They lived together, built a life, talked about marriage, until one day she left him for her personal trainer. She told him she needed someone more exciting. She got engaged to the trainer within months, and my friend was humiliated. So he found a wonderful woman, got engaged, and planned a wedding that was pure revenge. The venue? The one he and his ex had always talked about. The wedding date? 1 week before his ex's. The DJ? The same one his ex had booked, so she had to find another. And the most savage part? He had his ex's favorite love song rewritten as a slow, mournful breakup song, and had his band play it. People immediately recognized it. His ex heard about it through mutual friends, and she went off on Facebook about how pathetic he was. He just liked her post and went back to celebrating. Story 30. This revenge wedding wasn't just petty. It was pure psychological warfare. The bride had been left at the altar. Her ex literally called her the morning of their wedding and said, "I can't do this." She was destroyed, but she didn't just move on. She made sure he'd regret it for the rest of his life. A year later, she was engaged again, and her wedding was a copy-paste of what her ex had bailed on. Same church, same flowers, even the same guest list. But the pettiest part? Her vows. She deliberately started them the way she had written her original vows for her ex, but then changed it midway, saying, "I thought I knew love before, but real love doesn't leave you standing alone in a wedding dress." The guests audibly gasped. Her ex? He saw the video on social media, messaged her, and asked if she had done it on purpose. Her response? Wouldn't you like to know? She blocked him right after. Story 31. This wedding was so obviously revenge-driven that people were literally taking bets on when the couple would divorce. The bride had been engaged before, but her ex cheated on her with his assistant and dumped her over text. The assistant was 10 years younger, and within a year, they were engaged. The bride was furious, but she didn't cry over it. She strategically planned the most savage wedding imaginable. First, she made sure her wedding was before her ex's by 2 weeks. Then, she booked the exact venue he and his fiancé wanted, forcing them to find another. She also hired his favorite band, so he had to settle for a DJ. But the coup de grâce? She sent his entire family an invitation. Not because they were close, but because she knew they hated his new fiancé. And they came. All of them. During the reception, one of his aunts got a little too drunk and started loudly talking about how much better this wedding was than the one her ex was about to have. People recorded it. It went viral in their town. Her ex's fiancé went ballistic on Facebook about pathetic exes who can't let go. The bride? She just posted honeymoon photos with the caption, "Some upgrades are effortless." Her marriage lasted 2 years. The satisfaction? Forever. Story 32. This wedding was the pettiest power move I've ever seen. The groom had been left at the altar when his ex called him the morning of the wedding and said, "I'm sorry, I just can't." He was devastated. Until, 3 months later, she was engaged to someone else. Rather than break down, he plotted, When he met someone new and planned his wedding, he copied the wedding he and his ex had planned to a T. Same venue, same flowers, same seating arrangements. But the absolute best part? He invited his ex's family, and they showed up. When he made his vows, he made direct eye contact with his ex's mother and said, "I finally found someone who isn't afraid to show up." The ex's mother teared up. The ex heard about it and messaged him, furious. His response? A picture of him on his honeymoon, holding up a champagne glass. Story 33. This wasn't just a revenge wedding. It was an entire social event built on spite. The bride had been in a 9-year relationship, constantly waiting for her boyfriend to propose. Then one day he told her, "I just don't see myself getting married. Ever." She was crushed. But then, 8 months later, he proposed to someone else. So what did she do? She went nuclear. She got engaged within a year and scheduled her wedding for the exact same day as her ex's. But that wasn't all. She made sure her wedding was twice as extravagant, invited all their mutual friends, and booked all the best local vendors so her ex's wedding had to settle for second-rate options. On the wedding day, her event was all over social media. Her guests posted nonstop about how breathtaking it was, how everything was perfect. Her ex? His wedding was overshadowed completely. Even some of his own guests were secretly checking out her photos. The best part? His wife had an emotional breakdown that night, accusing him of settling. They lasted less than 2 years. The bride? She's still happily married and still smiling. Story 34. A truly legendary revenge wedding happened in my town, and the level of pettiness was award-worthy. The groom had been engaged before, but his ex cheated on him with his own brother. Yeah, his brother. The family was torn apart, but rather than cause drama, he went silent. Until he got engaged. His wedding was a masterclass in strategic revenge. He chose the same venue his ex had always dreamed of. He hired the same wedding photographer she had planned to use. And he picked the same wedding date just a year later. But the most brutal moment? During the reception, he made a toast. They say family is forever, but sometimes love teaches you that betrayal is stronger than blood. So, to my wife, thank you for showing me what loyalty actually looks like. The whole room went silent. His ex and his brother? They had to sit there and take it. And when their wedding photos went up online, his were 10 times grander. His ex messaged him later, asking if he did all this on purpose. He just replied, "Hope you had a great view from the cheap seats." Story 35. This wedding wasn't just revenge, it was a whole life upgrade. The bride had been in a toxic relationship for 6 years. Her ex constantly belittled her, told her she wasn't good enough to be a wife, and even made fun of her for wanting a big wedding. Then he cheated on her and dumped her, saying, "I need someone who's on my level." She was crushed, but she got the last laugh. She lost weight, started a business, and met someone incredible. Within 2 years, she was engaged, and she planned a wedding that was the biggest event their small town had ever seen. But she didn't stop there. She invited her ex's boss, his childhood best friend, and even his parents, who still loved her. They all came. During the reception, his own mother got up and gave a speech about how happy she was for her, how she finally found someone who deserved her. The ex's fiancé? She saw the photos online and went on a Twitter rant about insecure people who need to prove something. The bride? She just posted a honeymoon pic with the caption, "Some people marry up, some people settle down." Her ex? His marriage lasted 9 months. Hers? Still going strong. Story 36. I attended a wedding where the bride didn't just get married, she sent a message. Her ex had dumped her after 5 years, claiming he wasn't ready for marriage. She was devastated until she found out he proposed to someone else 3 months later. Instead of confronting him, she did something way better. She got engaged fast and planned a wedding that was eerily similar to what she and her ex had once dreamed of. Same venue, same color scheme, even the same exact wedding cake design. But the most brutal moment? Her vows. I thought I knew what love was before, but real love doesn't hesitate. Real love doesn't make you wait for years just to throw you away for something new. The crowd gasped. People were whispering at their tables. And guess what? The ex's sister was at the wedding. She recorded the whole thing and sent it to him. His new fiancé? She lost her mind when she saw the video. Their wedding was postponed indefinitely. The bride? She just posted a honeymoon pic with the caption, "Right place, right time, right person." Story 37. A guy I knew threw the pettiest revenge wedding I've ever seen. His fiancée left him the night before their wedding, over a text. She said she wasn't sure anymore. 3 months later, she was engaged to someone else. Instead of falling apart, he got engaged within a year and planned a wedding that was pure revenge. Same venue, same flowers, Even the same wedding planner his ex had wanted, but couldn't afford. Then came the wedding invitations. His ex's entire family got one, and they came. But the moment that sealed the deal? His wedding toast. Sometimes things fall apart because they were never meant to hold together in the first place. Thank God for unanswered prayers. His ex? She saw the pictures all over social media. A week later, she messaged him, asking if he still thought about her. He left her on red. Story 38. This wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a masterclass in payback. The bride had been with her ex for 7 years, expecting a proposal, when he dumped her. His reason? I'm just not ready to settle down. A year later, he was married to someone 10 years younger. So she made sure her wedding was the event of the decade. She booked the dream venue her ex and his wife had wanted before they could afford it. She hired the same caterer, but went for the most expensive menu. She had mutual friends post about how amazing it was on social media on her ex's anniversary. But the final touch? Her wedding song was the one she and her ex had picked out years ago. Her ex's wife found out and went on a Twitter rant about bitter people. The bride? She just smiled and danced her way to happily ever after. Story 39. A legendary revenge wedding happened in my town, and it was so brutal it made the local news. The groom had been engaged before, but his ex cheated on him with his brother. His brother, rather than confront them, he played the long game. When he met someone new and got engaged, he planned a wedding designed to destroy them. Same venue his ex had always wanted, same weekend as his brother's anniversary. And the best part, during his speech, he raised his glass and said, "To loyalty, to love, and to the people who actually understand what those words mean." The whole room went silent. His ex and his brother were there, and they looked like they wanted to disappear. 3 months later, the brother and the ex broke up. The groom? Still married. Still winning. Story 40. This wasn't just a revenge wedding. It was a whole revenge rebrand. The bride had been in a toxic relationship for 6 years. Her ex constantly put her down, told her she wasn't wife material, and said no one else would want her. Then, he cheated on her and married someone else within a year. She was heartbroken until she realized something. She could show him what he lost. She started working out, focusing on herself, and leveling up. Within 2 years, she was engaged, and she planned a wedding so extravagant it made headlines. The venue, a private villa in Italy. The dress, a custom gown worth more than his car. The guests, even some of his old friends who gladly posted about how much better off she was. And the best part? Her ex's wife saw all the wedding coverage and had a meltdown. She accused him of still being in love with his ex. And guess what? They got divorced 6 months later. The bride? She's still happily married, thriving, and looking better than ever. Story 41. A friend of mine went to a wedding that wasn't just about love, but revenge. Plain and simple. The bride, let's call her Sarah, had been with her fiancé Ethan for 8 years. They had bought a house together, adopted a dog, and spent holidays with each other's families. The engagement was inevitable, or so Sarah thought. Just months before their wedding, Ethan broke things off out of nowhere, citing that he needed to figure things out. Sarah was devastated. She loved him, and the wedding was planned. But the ultimate betrayal came when he was married to someone else within 4 months. Sarah was, of course, crushed. But instead of letting it define her, she turned it into motivation. She made a vow to herself. If she was going to get married again, she was going to make sure her wedding was 10 times better than Ethan's. She met a guy, David, a few months later. They clicked instantly, and within 6 months, they were engaged. Sarah decided to plan a wedding that was nothing short of spectacular, but the real magic came when she chose the venue. The same venue Ethan and his new wife had chosen for their wedding. The venue was exclusive and hard to get into, but she managed to secure it within weeks. The best part? She didn't just pick the same venue, she picked the exact same wedding date that Ethan and his wife had planned. Of course, she sent out invitations to all of Ethan's friends and family, many of whom had known her for years. She also made sure to post sneak peeks of the wedding preparations online so that Ethan and his new wife could follow every move. When the day came, she stood at the altar, smiling as she exchanged vows with David. As they walked back down the aisle after their ceremony, Sarah couldn't help but glance over at her ex, who had been awkwardly invited, but didn't come, along with his new wife. The satisfaction in that moment was indescribable. And the best part? Sarah's wedding went down in history as the event of the year, and Ethan's wedding? Barely a blip on anyone's radar. Story 42. I went to a wedding that was practically designed as an act of revenge. The groom, Chris, had been in a relationship with his ex for 7 years before she left him for his best friend. She told him he wasn't spontaneous enough, and she needed someone more exciting. Naturally, Chris was devastated, But rather than wallowing, he got to work. After a year of trying to get his life back on track, he started dating someone new. Her name was Emily, and from day one, it was clear that Chris had found someone who was not only more adventurous but also a better match. He proposed after just 6 months, and the wedding planning began. Here's where the revenge kicks in. Chris and Emily knew that Chris's ex, Grace, and her new husband were planning a wedding on the same date. So they made sure that their wedding was larger, more extravagant, and most importantly, 2 weeks before Grace's wedding, they booked the best venue in the area, hired a high-end wedding photographer, and made sure all the mutual friends were invited, especially Grace's family, many of whom were still very fond of Chris. But the real revenge came during the wedding toast. When Chris stood up to give his speech, he said, "You don't realize how much you miss out on until you finally find the right person. Thank you to the ones who gave me the space to find her and the courage to walk away from the one who couldn't see what was right in front of her." You could feel the tension in the room. Grace's mother tried to hide her tears, and the rest of the family tried to pretend like it wasn't awkward. But the whole room knew. Chris's ex eventually saw the photos on social media, and to no surprise, Grace's marriage collapsed only a year later. Story 43. The most awkward wedding I've ever attended was one where the bride was extremely transparent about the revenge she was serving. Her name was Jessica, and she had been with her ex-fiancé, Kyle, for over 5 years before he left her to marry another woman, saying he couldn't commit and that he didn't feel the same anymore. Jessica was crushed, obviously, but instead of getting angry, she got even. She started dating a guy named Peter within a few months of her breakup. They hit it off right away, and within a year, they were engaged. Jessica told Peter that she wanted their wedding to be everything her ex's wedding wasn't. So she started planning. Here's where the petty genius of Jessica's wedding came in. She intentionally planned every little detail of her wedding to match what she and Kyle had originally envisioned. From the wedding venue to the floral arrangements, she made sure every single detail was eerily similar to Kyle's original plans. The final move was when she hired the same photographer Kyle had hired, so there was no way he could avoid the parallel images. The best part of the wedding was the wedding speech. Jessica stood up and thanked her ex for being the one to show her exactly what she didn't want in a marriage. She also gave a big shout out to her new husband, Peter, for being someone who actually knew how to follow through. Jessica didn't care that she was rubbing it in Kyle's face. She was thriving. The most satisfying part? Her ex's new wife was visibly uncomfortable the entire time. That night, Jessica posted a picture from her wedding with the caption, "Sometimes, it takes getting lost to find your way." Story 44. I once worked a wedding that, to this day, I still refer to as the revenge of the century. The bride, Sarah, had been with her fiancé, Ben, for 4 years before he broke up with her, claiming that he wasn't ready to settle down. Sarah, devastated, didn't hear from Ben for months, until she found out he was engaged to someone else. What Sarah didn't expect was how much retribution she would take with her wedding. Rather than waiting around to heal, Sarah decided that the best revenge was a life well lived. So she booked the luxurious venue her ex had always talked about wanting, arranged a designer dress, and chose the exact date that Ben had planned to marry someone else. And just for fun, she made sure that she invited all of Ben's friends, including his family, knowing full well they'd gossip about how much better her wedding was. The most savage part? During the reception, Sarah's mother stood up and raised her glass. "Here's to the ones who get away, and here's to the ones who never deserve to stay." The whole room erupted in laughter, especially the ex's mother, who nodded approvingly. Afterwards, Sarah made a post on social media, thanking everyone for their support. She included a photo of her and her new husband with the caption, "Some things are meant to happen." Her ex, Ben, tried to reach out, but Sarah never responded. Story 45. The most awkward wedding I attended was one that I can only describe as pure revenge. The bride, Rachel, had been engaged for 3 years to a man named Steven. They had talked about marriage, had planned everything, but when it came down to it, Steven broke it off without warning. He told Rachel that he wasn't in love with her anymore. Rachel was crushed, but instead of confronting him, she quietly started dating someone else. Within a few months, she met the man who would eventually become her new husband, and she made it her mission to make her ex regret his decision. Rachel planned a grand wedding, the kind of wedding Steven had always dreamed of but had never been able to afford. She booked a destination wedding in Bali, surrounded by the most beautiful scenery and a guest list packed with people who had been friends with her ex. The moment that sealed it, Rachel wore the same dress that Steven had always said he loved, only better. She flawlessly executed every detail of the day to make sure it was clear to her ex that she had moved on in a way he could never replicate. When Rachel posted her wedding photos online, Steven left a very passive-aggressive comment about how he was happy for her. She just replied, "Couldn't have been happier." Her ex, He got divorced within a year. Rachel and her husband, still happily married.